The drop coordinates were correct. The landing was textbook. The problem materialized approximately 4 seconds after the team's boots touched alien soil, when Vieth performed the traditional equipment check and discovered that their supply pod had landed somewhere decidedly not here. According to the locator beacon still functioning, despite cosmic irony, it had embedded itself in a cliff face 3 kilometers northeast, accessible only by scaling vertical rock that none of them were equipped to climb without the climbing gear that was, naturally, in the supply pod. Darren stood with hands on hips, surveying the landscape with the mild expression of someone who just watched their coffee mug slide off a table in slow motion. The others cycled through more dramatic responses. "This is unprecedented," Vieth announced, their compound eyes reflecting fragmented images of the forested terrain surrounding them. "Equipment failure protocols require immediate beacon activation and extraction request." "Already done," Quilks said, their amphibious skin flushing through several colors that Darren had learned to interpret as variations of distress. "Minimum response time is 48 hours. Standard procedure for training exercises. 48 hours without environmental suits." Thren's fur rippled with agitation. The mammalian species prided themselves on endurance, but endurance backed by proper equipment. "The atmospheric analysis hasn't been completed. We're breathing it fine," Darren observed, already walking toward the forest edge. "That's usually a good sign." Moss, the crystalline entity whose thought processes operated on geological timescales compared to the others, finally completed their assessment of the situation. Their surfaces chimed softly, the translation matrix rendering it as, "We appear to be experiencing suboptimal circumstances." The narrator would like to note that this might constitute the understatement of the local solar cycle. 5 trained survival specialists, selected from various species across known space for their expertise in hostile environment navigation, now stood in a perfectly survivable environment, rendered completely helpless by the absence of the technology they'd been trained to use. They could operate in vacuum, underwater, in acidic atmospheres and sub-zero wastelands, provided they had the appropriate gear. On a temperate forest world with breathable air, edible-looking vegetation, and the sound of running water somewhere downslope, they were paralyzed. Except for the human, who had wandered off. "Darren," Vieth called, their voice carrying the particular harmonics that suggested procedural violation. "We need to establish a perimeter and await extraction in formation." "You do that." Darren's voice drifted back from somewhere between the trees. "I'm going to look around." Quilks's skin flushed deeper purple. "That's not protocol. Protocol assumed we'd have equipment." Thren pointed out, though their tone suggested they sided with protocol on principle. "Without supplies, what exactly are we protecting by standing in formation?" "Our organizational structure," Vieth said. "Chaos prevention. Established hierarchy." "Sure." Darren reappeared, shirt bundled into a makeshift sack, and clearly containing something. The team stared at the collection of small purple berries the human deposited on a flat rock, with the casual confidence of someone who hadn't just committed what might be xenobiological suicide. "You ate native vegetation." Quilks's translator carried tones of horror, usually reserved for discussing spatial anomalies. "Without laboratory analysis, without genetic sequencing, without even a basic toxicity scan. I watched some bird-looking things eat them first," Darren said, popping another berry into their mouth. "Then I tried a tiny piece on my lip, waited, tried a bit on my tongue, waited, swallowed a small amount, waited, been about an hour, still alive, not hallucinating. And they're pretty good." Tart. Vaith's antenna twitched rapidly, processing this information against their entire cultural database of food acquisition. Your species determines edibility through self-experimentation. Sometimes we look it up first, Darren allowed. But yeah, basically, how did your people figure out what to eat? We emerged as a species with instinctive knowledge of our nutritional requirements, refined through genetic memory and later codified through scientific analysis. Fancy, Darren said. We just ate stuff and remembered what didn't kill us. These didn't kill me. Anyone hungry? The silence that followed contained multitudes. Thren's stomach broke it with a growl that transcended species barriers. They could have cumulative toxicity, Quilks protested, but weakly. Could, Darren agreed. Probably don't, based on the bird things eating them daily, and we'll only be here 2 days anyway. Your call, Moss chimed thoughtfully, reaching out a crystalline appendage and delicately selecting a single berry. They absorbed it through surface osmosis, internal structures visibly analyzing the compounds. After a long moment, nutritionally adequate. No immediate toxins detected. Darren's methodology, while statistically risky, appears functionally sound for short-term survival. Thren took 3 berries. Then Vaith, moving with the deliberation of someone violating everything they'd been taught, took 1. Quilks waited until everyone else had survived another 5 minutes, then tried the smallest berry in the pile. Acceptable, Thren admitted. The texture is unusual, Vaith noted. Darren was already gathering more, having identified several nearby bushes bearing the same fruit. The human moved through the forest with a purposeful randomness that baffled the others, pausing to examine plants, turning over rocks, sniffing the air, tasting moisture on leaves. It looked undirected, but every few minutes Darren returned with something: berries, nuts from a different tree that the human cracked against stones and determined safe through the same alarming self-experimentation process. Information about a stream downslope, observations about which areas seem to have animal traffic. Your species navigates environments through sensory exploration, Moss observed, as close to a question as they typically came. Yeah, mostly. Darren was examining a cluster of mushrooms with deep suspicion and ultimately left them alone. We're not great at any one thing, but we're okay at a lot of things. Jack of all trades situation. That seems inefficient, Vaith said. Super inefficient, Darren agreed cheerfully. But when you don't have specialized tools, being generally competent at whatever comes up works pretty well. The sky began its shift toward evening, the local star painting the clouds in shades that translated poorly to most species' visual spectrums, but which Darren kept pausing to watch. When the first drops of rain began, the others instinctively moved toward the rocky overhang they'd been using as a gathering point. Darren moved toward open ground. "What are you doing?" Quilks called. "You'll get wet." "Yeah," Darren called back, scooping a depression in the soil with bare hands. "That's the idea." The team watched from shelter as the human worked with increasing rain as an ally rather than obstacle. Darren lined the depression with broad leaves, overlapping them carefully, then arranged flat stones at angles that would funnel water. When the rain intensified, the humans stripped off their outer jacket and shirt, fashioning them into additional funnels that directed water into their boots, positioned to collect runoff. The water could be contaminated, Quilks said, but they were watching with the intensity of someone witnessing a magic trick. "Probably is," Darren agreed, now thoroughly soaked and seemingly unconcerned. "That's why we're going to boil it." With what equipment? Darren had gathered dry grass and wood from beneath the overhang, protecting it from rain, and was now doing something extraordinarily tedious with a stick, a flat piece of wood, and a great deal of persistent friction. The process looked absurd. It also, after several minutes of effort that made Thren's arms ache in sympathy, produced smoke, then ember, then actual fire, when Darren carefully transferred it to a nest of the driest grass. "You created combustion through mechanical friction," Vaeth said, their voice carrying tones the translator struggled with. Or, possibly, mixed with academic horror at the inefficiency. "Yep." Darren fed the fire carefully, building it up, then positioned stones around it. "Takes a while, uses a lot of energy, and there are about 50 easier ways to do it with tools we don't have. But it works." The human filled a broad leaf with water, supported it on a framework of green sticks over the fire, and actually managed to heat the water to boiling. It took forever. It was wildly impractical. It produced drinkable water from rain, while everyone else stood there with their advanced education and empty canteens. Moss chimed softly, which translated as something between laughter and philosophical observation. "Elegance is a luxury. Function is a necessity." "I'll drink to that," Darren said, waiting for the water to cool, then doing exactly that. The rain continued through the night. Darren kept the fire going in shifts, feeding it when needed, protecting it with an angled piece of bark. The human also slept, but lightly, waking periodically to tend necessities. The others, accustomed to environmental suits regulating everything automatically, found the constant attention required by fire maintenance exhausting to even witness. Morning arrived with the specific kind of cheerfulness that follows rain, everything dripping and fresh and slightly too damp. Darren was already awake, working on something new. "What are you building?" Thren asked, watching the human weave branches together. "Shelter," Darren said. "The overhang is fine, but if it rains again, we'll want something more waterproof, and a place to store stuff." "We'll be extracted within 24 hours now," Vaeth pointed out. "Is construction necessary?" "Probably not," Darren admitted, continuing to work. "But I'm bored. We might as well be comfortable, and if extraction gets delayed, we'll be glad we did it." The shelter that emerged over the next several hours would have horrified any structural engineer. It possessed no elegant lines, no optimized load distribution, no calculated stress points. It was a pile of sticks, vines, leaves, and packed earth that formed a waterproof space large enough for 5, with a slanted roof to shed rain, and a fire pit positioned to vent smoke properly. Vaeth attempted to help by calculating proper support angles. Darren thanked them, then continued building by eye, testing weight by feel, adjusting when something felt wrong. The structure that resulted shouldn't have worked according to Vaeth's mathematics, but it did work according to the older mathematics of trial, error, and good enough. "It's not optimal," Vaeth said. "Nope," Darren agreed. "The eastern support could fail under sustained wind. Then we'll fix it if that happens. You're building to a standard of probable adequacy rather than engineered certainty." "Yep," Vaeth's antenna expressed complex frustration. "That seems actually quite practical given our time constraints and available materials." Quilks had been quiet, observing. "Your species built civilizations this way? Trial and error?" "Pretty much," Darren said, adding a cross brace that seemed arbitrary but somehow made the whole thing sturdier. "We tried stuff, kept what worked, changed what didn't. Took forever and involved a lot of spectacular failures, but eventually we figured things out. We received our technology through genetic inheritance," Quilks said quietly. "Our ancestors emerged knowing how to shape our environment through biological secretions. We never had to learn through failure." "That sounds way more efficient," Darren said. It was, Quilks agreed. Until now, when that inheritance includes no knowledge of functioning without it. Moss had been silently handing Darren materials for the past hour, having observed the pattern of what the human selected. They chimed now. The human methodology operates on different principles. Not optimal efficiency, but robust flexibility. I'm mostly just doing camping stuff my parents taught me, Darren said, finishing the shelter's roof. This is pretty basic. The team stood back and regarded the structure. It was ugly, improvised, and would likely fall apart within a month. It was also waterproof, stable, and had taken half a day to build from literally nothing. I want to help, Thren said suddenly. Give me a task, Darren considered. We need more food. The berries are good, but we should diversify. Head downstream, look for anything that looks like nuts, seeds, or root vegetables. The bird analogues seem to eat the purple berries and those yellow seed pods, so those are probably safe. Avoid anything bright red or that smells really bitter. Bring back samples of anything you're unsure about, and we'll test it. Thren departed with the focus of someone given purpose. Father watched them go, then turned to Darren. You delegated based on Thren's physical capabilities and movement speed. Yeah, they're faster and stronger than me. Makes sense for them to do the ranging. You assigned tasks without establishing hierarchy. Everyone's good at different stuff, Darren said, organizing their camp with the same practical logic. Fire pit here, food storage there, water collection upslope, latrine downslope and distant. Seems dumb not to use that. By midday they had a functioning camp. It wasn't sophisticated. There were no power sources, no climate controls, no communication arrays. But there was clean water, a variety of foods, shelter from weather, and a fire that never went out because someone was always awake to tend it. Quilks discovered that maintaining all of this required constant attention. The fire needed fuel, the water needed boiling, the food needed checking for spoilage, weather needed watching for changes. It was exhausting in a way their technology had eliminated, this constant sensory engagement with the environment. How did your ancestors maintain this level of vigilance? They asked Darren. Practice, Darren said, showing Quilks how to recognize when kindling was dry enough to burn well, and necessity. If you let the fire go out in winter, you died, so you learned to not let the fire go out. We would have developed technology to tend the fire. We did eventually, but first we just tended the fire. Darren taught basic tasks through demonstration, maintaining the fire at the right temperature, recognizing subtle differences between edible and questionable plants, setting simple snares, using woven grass that might catch small animals. The human expected everyone to make mistakes and treated errors as information rather than failures. This baffled Vaith, whose species learned through cognitive download and genetic memory. You're teaching through repetition and error correction. That's extremely inefficient. Sure is, Darren agreed, re-demonstrating the proper way to weave grass into cordage after Vaith's first attempt fell apart. But it's how humans learn. We try, we mess up, we figure out why, we try again. Eventually it sticks. Eventually, Vaith repeated, not immediately. Nope. Learning takes time. Moss surprised everyone by successfully identifying a new food source using Darren's observational method. They'd noticed a small rodent analog repeatedly visiting certain roots, digging them up and eating them. Moss suggested investigating. The roots, when tested through Darren's careful methodology, proved edible and surprisingly nutritious. You applied human pattern recognition, Darren said, genuinely pleased. I observed, formed hypothesis, tested carefully. Moss chimed. The methodology is sound, merely slow. Slow and steady, Darren agreed. Thren returned from their ranging with information about a grove of nut-bearing trees, a kilometer east, and the observation that local wildlife used specific trails through the forest. The human method of watching and learning the environment is effective. I tracked 3 different species to their food sources simply by following their paths. Your people don't do this? Darren asked. We track prey through enhanced senses and direct confrontation. This is, Thren paused, more patient. The camp expanded organically over the day. A better latrine system with a proper waste pit. A smoking rack for preserving food. Markers made from stripped bark, indicating safe paths to water and foraging sites. A drying area for kindling protected from potential rain. These weren't sophisticated solutions. They were iterative improvements made by people paying attention to what worked and what didn't. Vaith contributed a calculated optimal layout for food storage based on temperature and airflow. Darren implemented it exactly as specified, and it worked beautifully. Quilks designed a better water filtration system using sand, charcoal from the fire, and gravel. Moss identified patterns in local weather by observing plant behaviors and cloud formations, giving them several hours warning before rain. The camp became genuinely collaborative, each species contributing according to their strengths, learning from failures, building on successes. It shouldn't have worked. They were from completely different evolutionary backgrounds with incompatible approaches to problem solving. But Darren's fundamental assumption that everyone would contribute something useful, combined with the humans' complete comfort with imperfect solutions, created space for everyone to experiment. On the 3rd day, the equipment locator beacon changed status. The cliff face had shifted slightly in a minor seismic event, opening a navigable path to their supply pod. They could retrieve their technology now. The team stood around the morning fire, drinking boiled water flavored with mint-analogous leaves Quilks had found, considering this information. We should retrieve it, Vaith said, but without their usual certainty. Definitely more comfortable with proper equipment. Quilks agreed. Moss chimed a question in Darren's direction. The human shrugged, poking the fire with a stick. The tools would make things easier. Easier isn't the same as necessary, though. We're doing fine. Fine, Thren repeated, the word heavy with implication. 3 days ago I would have said survival without equipment was impossible. Now we have a functioning camp, food security, and established protocols. You have human protocols. Vaith corrected. Trial and error. Iterative improvement. Comfortable inadequacy. It works, though, Quilk said quietly. That's what I can't reconcile. Your methods seemed primitive at first. Embarrassing, even. But we were the ones standing helpless while you built everything we needed from literal sticks and rocks. Camping skills, Darren said. Really basic stuff humans learn as kids. You emerged as a species without genetic inheritance of survival knowledge, Moss observed. Without instinctive understanding of your nutritional requirements, without biological tools for environmental manipulation, you had to learn everything through direct experimentation. Yeah, it was probably pretty rough for our ancestors, Darren admitted. Lots of them died figuring out what not to eat. So you developed a cultural methodology of careful observation, conservative experimentation, and knowledge transfer through teaching rather than inheritance. Vaith said slowly, working through it. Your entire species learned to learn through trial and error because you had no alternative. Basically. And now that methodology allows you to function in novel environments without support systems because you never developed dependency on inherited knowledge or specialized tools. I mean, we love tools, Darren said. Tools are great, but yeah, we can usually figure something out without them if we need to. The team retrieved their equipment. The trek took 3 hours, and the supply pod contained everything they'd been missing. Environmental suits, food synthesizers, water purification units, communication arrays, medical scanners, climate shelters. They brought it all back to camp. The shelter Darren had built from branches suddenly looked absurd next to the climate-controlled dome they could have erected in minutes. The careful water collection and boiling seemed laughable compared to the purification unit. The foraged food, hand-gathered and tested through risky self-experimentation, was primitive compared to nutritionally optimized synthesized rations. They set up the equipment but didn't dismantle the camp. "Seems wasteful to abandon it," Thren said, and nobody disagreed. The rescue ship arrived early on the 4th day, landing with the smooth precision of advanced technology in the clearing where 5 specialists had first materialized helpless and equipmentless 3 days prior. As they packed, Darren noticed each team member taking something from the camp. Vaith carefully preserved samples of the berries and roots in stasis containers for later analysis. Quilks photographed the water collection system from multiple angles. Moss took precise measurements of the shelter's structure. Thren pocketed several of the stones from the fire ring. Darren took nothing, having already absorbed whatever lessons existed into the general database of experiences that made up human knowledge. The methods used here weren't novel or remarkable by human standards, just basic camping skills, the kind of thing parents taught children on weekend trips, the foundational knowledge of a species that had learned to survive through paying attention and trying things and remembering what worked. On the ship, the incident report was filed as successful survival training with equipment malfunction. Accurate enough. The official record noted all team members maintained health and safety throughout the extraction delay period. The unofficial personal logs told different stories. Vaith wrote extensively about human pedagogical methods and their application to novel problem-solving, requesting further study opportunities. Quilks documented the psychological barriers their species had developed around functioning without technological support and proposed training modifications. Thren filed a surprisingly philosophical commentary about the difference between strength and capability, power and adaptability. Moss, whose reports took weeks to compose, simply noted, "Efficiency is not identical to effectiveness. Humans demonstrate the latter through acceptance of the former's absence." Darren napped during the flight, exhausted in the specific way that comes from 3 days of constant environmental vigilance, comfortable in the recycled air and controlled temperature of the ship, already half forgetting the details of the camp that had seemed so important while building it. The human hadn't done anything remarkable by human standards, just basic camping, the kind of thing people did for recreation. But to the others, it had revealed something they'd never quite noticed about the species they'd been trained alongside. Humans didn't conquer environments through superiority or dominate them through force. They survived through stubborn, patient observation and the complete comfort with imperfect solutions that came from millions of years of having no better options. They were persistence incarnate, adequacy personified, good enough made flesh. They could operate in space, underwater, in hostile atmospheres, but they'd learned all those capabilities by first mastering the art of just figuring things out with whatever was available. Every human advancement had been built on foundations of trial, error, iteration, and the fundamental assumption that if something didn't work the first time, you tried again differently. The rescue ship broke atmosphere, climbing toward the stars and the comfortable certainty of established protocols. In the cargo bay, next to emergency rations and certified survival equipment, sat samples of berries tested through self-experimentation, photographs of shelters built from intuition rather than mathematics, and stones that had held heat for a fire, maintained through attention rather than automation. 5 specialists had entered the wild empty-handed. 4 had waited for rescue, while 1 had started looking for berries, as if being stranded without equipment was just another problem to solve rather than a crisis to endure. The difference, it turned out, wasn't in capability or training or intelligence. It was in the fundamental assumption about what constituted survival, whether it meant maintaining protocols until extraction or simply finding something to eat and building a place to sleep and figuring out the rest as you went. The ship's computer logged their return, noted successful mission completion, and filed the whole incident under routine training exercises. Somewhere in the galaxy, the planet continued its rotation, indifferent to the camp slowly decomposing back into forest, the fire pit cooling to scattered stones, the shelter collapsing into the underbrush. And somewhere else, Darren woke from their nap, checked that everyone had made it back safely, and went looking for something to eat, because the synthesized rations were technically nutritious, but honestly kind of bland compared to those tart purple berries. Some habits, it seemed, were hard to break.